The emergency room doors burst open as paramedics rushed in with a convulsing patient. Emily Carter's hands moved automatically, prepping emergency supplies, but her trained eyes caught something odd. The patient's lips weren't just blue, they bore an unusual violet tinge she'd never seen before. Male, mid-30s, collapsed during a business dinner, the paramedic reported. BP 60/40ths and dropping, heart rate erratic. Emily recognized the unconscious man from magazine covers, Nathan Prescott, the biotech CEO whose controversial research she'd been following. Her supervisor, Dr. Stevens, began barking orders for standard anaphylaxis protocol. But the violet discoloration. Emily had just read about this in her toxicology studies last night, forcing herself to stay awake after a double shift because she couldn't afford the certification exam retake fee if she failed. "Dr. Stevens," she interrupted, earning a sharp glare. "The discoloration pattern suggests a modified hemlock derivative. Look at the fingernail striations." "Nurse Carter, this is clearly anaphylactic shock. Step aside." "Sir, please." Emily stood her ground, remembering her father's words before his stroke. "Trust your gut, Emmy. The twitching pattern is wrong for anaphylaxis. This matches the hybrid toxin profile I just studied. If I'm wrong, I'll resign. But if we follow anaphylaxis protocol, he'll be dead in minutes." The heart monitor screamed as Prescott's vitals plummeted. Dr. Stevens hesitated for one crucial second, then nodded sharply. Emily's hands flew, preparing the antidote cocktail she'd memorized. Time seemed to freeze as she administered the treatment. 1 minute, 2. Then, slowly, the erratic heart rhythm stabilized. Color crept back into Prescott's skin. 3 hours later, Emily slumped at the nurse's station, her phone buzzing with texts from her brother begging for rent money again. Her father's care facility bill glared from her email. Final notice. "Nurse Carter." She looked up to find the hospital administrator looming over her, expression grave. Before he could speak, a voice cut in. "Is this the nurse who saved my life?" Nathan Prescott stood there, still pale but very much alive, wearing a hospital gown like it was a business suit. His security team hovered anxiously behind him. "Mr. Prescott needs to be back in bed," Emily said automatically. "I'll return there," he replied, "if you'll explain how you recognized a toxin that technically doesn't exist outside my company's classified research." Emily's stomach dropped. She'd been so focused on saving his life, she hadn't considered how she'd explain knowing about a compound that was apparently corporate secrets. "Someone tried to kill you with an experimental compound," Emily explained, checking Nathan's vitals the next morning. She'd worked a double shift to avoid going home to her stack of unpaid bills. The question is how they got access to it. Nathan watched her work with unsettling intensity. More interesting is how a nurse recognized a toxin that's still in development. "I study a lot." Emily adjusted his IV, conscious of his security team's scrutiny. "The library doesn't charge late fees if you bring cookies to the staff." A smile flickered across Nathan's face. "Most people don't spend their free time reading pharmaceutical research. Most people can afford cable TV." The words slipped out before Emily could stop them. She tensed, but Nathan actually chuckled. "Fair enough, though I suspect there's more to it than that." He studied her face. "You knew exactly what to do. That kind of quick thinking comes from experience, not just study." Emily hesitated. Discussing her background meant explaining her father's experimental treatment disaster, which led to questions she'd rather avoid. But before she could respond, a sharp voice cut in. "Nathan, darling, I came as soon as I heard." A woman in a designer suit swept in, her heels clicking purposefully. Victoria Monroe, Nathan's business partner. Emily recognized her from company press releases. Victoria barely spared Emily a glance before turning to Nathan. "The board is in chaos. We need to handle this immediately." She placed a manicured hand on Nathan's arm. "I've already called an emergency meeting." "I haven't been discharged," Nathan pointed out mildly. "I'm sure the nurse can handle that paperwork." Victoria's dismissive tone made Emily's spine stiffen. This is about the company's survival. Emily began gathering her supplies, but Nathan's voice stopped her. Actually, Nurse Carter's insights might be valuable here. She recognized the compound used against me. Victoria's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose. A nurse? Recognized our classified research? That's what we need to discuss. Nathan turned to Emily. Would you be willing to consult on this? We'll compensate you fairly, of course. Emily thought of her father's medical bills, her brother's debts, the toxicology certification fees. But she also thought of the case studies she'd read about Nathan's company, promising treatments made inaccessible by astronomical prices. I'll consult, she said carefully, but I have conditions. Victoria's laugh was pure silk. Conditions? For the privilege of working with Prescott Biotech. For helping identify who tried to kill your CEO, Emily corrected, meeting Victoria's gaze steadily. My first condition. Any treatments developed from this investigation need to be accessible to average patients, not just those with premium insurance. Nathan leaned forward, interest sharpening his features. Victoria's smile froze. You're hardly in a position to make demands about company policy, Victoria said coldly. Actually, Nathan interjected, she is. Someone in our company leaked classified research. Until we know who, the only person I'm certain I can trust is the woman who saved my life while everyone else was following the wrong protocol. Emily's pager buzzed, another emergency incoming. Think about it, she said, gathering her supplies. I'm on shift until midnight. But Mr. Prescott, whether you take my offer or not, you should know your company's latest trial drug. The one for stroke recovery? She paused at the door. The price point will kill more people than it saves. Sometimes the deadliest poisons come in prescription bottles. She left them with that thought, hurrying to her next patient. Behind her, she heard Victoria's sharp inhale and Nathan's thoughtful silence. What Emily didn't mention was how intimately she knew the cost of Prescott Biotech's treatments. Her father's medical bills were from their last miracle drug, the one that had promised to reverse his stroke damage but had instead left them drowning in debt with minimal improvement. She had 12 hours left in her shift to decide if she was making the biggest mistake of her career or possibly the first step toward changing a broken system. 3 days later, Emily stood in Prescott Biotech's gleaming lobby, feeling distinctly out of place in her simple blouse and slacks. She'd had to borrow the outfit from her friend Maria, another nurse who'd thought she was crazy for accepting Nathan's consultation offer. You're walking into a snake pit, Maria had warned. Corporate types don't like outsiders questioning their methods. Now, watching employees in designer suits hurry past, Emily wondered if she should have listened. But then, she remembered her father's vacant stare when she'd visited him yesterday. How he'd briefly gripped her hand when she mentioned her new consulting work, the first sign of awareness he'd shown in weeks. Nurse Carter. Nathan appeared from a nearby elevator, looking completely recovered. Thank you for coming, though I'm surprised you agreed after Victoria's warm welcome. Emily followed him into the elevator. I have questions about your stroke recovery drug trials. And I have questions about how a nurse recognized our classified compound. The elevator climbed smoothly toward the executive floor. Shall we trade answers? The boardroom was empty except for Victoria, who sat reviewing documents with aggressive focus. She barely looked up as they entered. Before we begin, Nathan said, taking his seat, I should mention that your condition about drug accessibility. The board is considering it. Victoria's pen stopped moving. Nathan, we're also investigating price gouging allegations in our recovery drug program. He met Emily's startled gaze. You're not the first to raise concerns. Emily pulled out her father's medical records. These are from your Phase 2 trials. Patient 147. She slid them across the table. My father. Nathan's expression shifted as he read. Victoria leaned forward despite herself. He was responding well, Emily continued, her voice steady. Then, suddenly, the trial ended. The treatment was fast-tracked to market at 20 times the trial cost. He lost all progress because we couldn't afford to continue. That decision came from above, Nathan said quietly, still reading. Everything comes from above, Emily countered, including, I suspect, the compound used to poison you. The room went still. Victoria's perfectly manicured nails drummed once on the table. Explain, Nathan ordered. Emily pulled out her research notes. The modifications to the base hemlock compound? They matched the signature work of Dr. James Monroe. She looked directly at Victoria. Your father. Victoria's composure cracked for just a moment. My father died 2 years ago, after being forced out of Prescott Biotech, Emily added. But his research lived on. I recognized it because he published extensively on hybrid toxins before his work was classified. The library had his early papers. Nathan's expression had turned calculating. Victoria's father was bitter about the company's direction but attempted murder. Check the trial termination dates, Emily suggested. Cross-reference them with the development timeline of the poison. Victoria stood abruptly. This is absurd. She's trying to manipulate you, Nathan, using her sad family story to worm her way into the company. Actually, Emily said quietly, I'm trying to save it. She pulled out one final document. This is a list of patients who died after being priced out of your treatments. Their families are preparing a class action lawsuit, but they'd settle for reform. Nathan took the document, his face grim. How long have you known about this? Since before the poisoning. I've been gathering data for months. Emily met his gaze steadily. I didn't save your life to blackmail you. I did it because I'm a nurse. But now I'm trying to save thousands more by fixing a broken system. Victoria laughed, but it held an edge of hysteria. You think you can just walk in here and… She already did, Nathan interrupted. The question is why. He studied Emily. You could have taken this to the media, used it to destroy us. Instead, you're offering a chance to change. Why? Because revenge doesn't help patients, Emily replied simply. Reform does. Before Nathan could respond, his security team burst in. Sir, we found something. About the poison's origin. Victoria went very still. Nathan nodded. Show us. The evidence was damning. Emails, money transfers, Victoria's careful orchestration of her father's last act of revenge, using the modified toxin he'd developed before his death, all while positioning herself to take control of the company once Nathan was gone. You used my father's research too, Victoria spat at Emily as security led her away. How does that make you any different? I used it to save a life, Emily replied, not end one. Later, standing at the window of Nathan's office, Emily watched Victoria being escorted from the building. What happens now? Now, Nathan said, joining her, we reform a broken system, starting with your father's treatment. He held out a folder. Full coverage, retroactive to the trial, and a position on our new patient advocacy board, if you're interested. Emily thought of her father's brief moment of awareness, of all the other families facing impossible choices. I'm interested, she said, but I'm keeping my nursing job. Nathan smiled. I wouldn't expect anything less. If you are enjoying the story till now, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. It costs you nothing, but for us, especially in these early days, it means the world. Let's continue. 1 month into her role on Prescott Biotech's Patient Advocacy Board, Emily discovered that reforming a pharmaceutical giant was like trying to redirect an ocean liner with a canoe paddle. Every proposal she made faced resistance from shareholders more interested in profit margins than patient outcomes. You can't just slash prices across the board, Nathan explained during one of their late-night strategy sessions. They'd fallen into a routine of meeting after her hospital shifts when the office was quiet enough to think. The research costs alone. I know. Emily rubbed her temples, fighting exhaustion. She'd pulled a double shift after a board meeting where she'd been repeatedly dismissed as the nurse by Victoria's remaining allies. But there has to be a middle ground between bankruptcy and extortion. Her father's improvement under the reinstated treatment proved what was possible when medicine prioritized healing over profit. But one success story wasn't enough to sway decades of corporate culture. "Actually," Nathan said slowly, "I've been thinking about something Victoria's father wrote before. Everything." He pulled up an old research file. His original vision wasn't just about developing new compounds. It was about making them adaptable, scalable. What if we could modify production methods instead of just prices? Emily leaned in, fatigue forgotten as she scanned the documents. "These manufacturing protocols, they're brilliant, but why weren't they implemented?" "Because the board chose the more profitable approach." Nathan's expression darkened. "The same meeting where they voted to force James Monroe out." "The meeting that set all this in motion," Emily murmured, "including my father's trial termination." Nathan nodded grimly. "Victoria's revenge plot may be over, but her allies on the board are still blocking reform. They're claiming your advocacy role is a conflict of interest due to your father's patient status. Let them." Emily straightened, determination replacing exhaustion. "I've faced worse opposition in the ER with fewer resources. We just need to—" Her phone buzzed. A text from her brother. Their father had suffered another stroke. Smaller this time, but enough to erase his recent progress. "Go," Nathan said immediately, seeing her face. "I'll handle the morning meeting." But when Emily reached the care facility, she found an unexpected visitor had beaten her there. Diana Chen, one of Victoria's closest board allies, was leaving her father's room. "Such a shame," Diana said silkily. "I heard he was improving, though perhaps it's for the best. Caring for a long-term patient can be so expensive." The threat was clear. Back off or watch your father lose coverage again. Emily's hands clenched, but years of nursing had taught her to keep her voice steady. "Miss Chen," she said calmly, "I believe you're violating HIPAA regulations by accessing my father's medical information without authorization. That's a federal offense." Diana's smile faltered. "I was merely expressing concern." "Save it for the ethics board," Emily cut in. "I'm sure they'll be fascinated by your personal visit to a patient whose coverage you're trying to terminate." She brushed past the stunned board member into her father's room. His vitals were stable, but his blank stare had returned. All their progress erased. Again. Emily's phone lit up with a message from Nathan. "Emergency board meeting called. They're voting to terminate the patient advocacy program. Need you here." She looked at her father, then at her phone. The choice that had seemed impossible a month ago now felt inevitable. She couldn't save everyone by playing nice within a broken system. "I'll be right back, Dad," she promised, squeezing his hand. "Time to finish what we started." The boardroom was packed when she arrived. Diana Chen sat smugly next to other Victoria loyalists, while Nathan stood at the head of the table, tension visible in his shoulders. "Before you vote," Emily announced, striding in, "you should know I've submitted comprehensive documentation of patient death rates correlated with price increases to the FDA, including evidence of board members blocking access to life-saving treatments for profit." Chaos erupted. Diana Chen shot to her feet. "You signed non-disclosure agreements, which don't cover federal whistleblowing about public safety," Emily countered. "Ask your lawyers." "You'll destroy the company," another board member warned. "No," Nathan said quietly. "She's saving it, just not in a way you recognize." He turned to the board. "We have two choices. Vote for comprehensive reform, including implementation of James Monroe's original production protocols, or face federal investigation and class action lawsuits." "You're siding with a nurse over your own board?" Diana demanded. "I'm siding with our patients," Nathan replied, "which is what we should have been doing all along." He met Emily's eyes briefly. "The vote will proceed in 1 hour. Choose wisely." Emily left them to their deliberations, returning to her father's room. She'd done what she could. Now all she could do was wait, and hope she hadn't just destroyed everything she'd worked to change. The hour before the board's vote stretched like a rubber band ready to snap. Emily sat beside her father's bed, watching his chest rise and fall in steady rhythm. each breath a reminder of why she'd risked everything. Her phone buzzed with messages from Nathan. Chen's calling every board member. Lawyers are reviewing your evidence. Stay where you are. I'll handle this. But Emily had never been good at staying put when there was work to be done. She pulled out her laptop and began compiling data from her father's latest tests. If she was going down, she'd go down fighting, with evidence. A soft knock interrupted her focus. Maria, her fellow nurse, stood in the doorway with 2 coffee cups and a worried expression. "Word's spreading through the hospital," Maria said, handing Emily a cup. "About your standoff with Prescott Biotech's board. You really threatened them with FDA whistleblowing?" Someone had to. Emily took a grateful sip. "Did you bring the patient records I asked for?" Maria patted her bag. "Every case where we lost patients due to insurance denials for Prescott's treatments, though I still think you're crazy for—" She stopped, face going pale as she looked past Emily. Diana Chen stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 men in suits. "Nurse Carter, I believe you have some company property that needs to be returned." Emily closed her laptop slowly. "Company property?" "All research data gathered during your consultation period belongs to Prescott Biotech." Chen's smile was razor-sharp. "Including any evidence you claim to have compiled." "Patient death records are public information," Emily countered, nodding slightly to Maria, who quietly slipped out her phone and began recording. "Your interpretation of that data while under company contract is proprietary," Chen replied. "Hand over your laptop and phone, or face legal consequences for theft of intellectual property." Emily stood, positioning herself between the suits and her father's bed. "You can't intimidate your way out of this, Miss Chen. The board needs to face reality." "Reality?" Chen laughed coldly. "Reality is that you're a nurse who got lucky once and decided to play corporate reformer. Reality is that your father's miracle recovery was a statistical anomaly that cost us millions in potential revenue. Reality is that you're recording yourself admitting to prioritizing revenue over patient survival," cut in a new voice. Nathan stood in the doorway, his own phone held up, and threatening a whistleblower in front of witnesses. Chen's composure cracked. "You're really choosing this nurse over decades of business relationships?" "I'm choosing to remember why we started this company," Nathan replied quietly. "To save lives, not count coins." He turned to Emily. "The board meeting's been moved up. They're ready to vote." Emily gathered her laptop, squeezing Maria's hand in silent thanks as she passed. In the hall, Nathan caught her arm. "Whatever happens in there," he said intently, "know that you've already changed things. Changed me." Their eyes met, and for a moment the weight of everything unspoken hung between them. Then Chen's sharp voice cut in. "How touching, but perhaps save the romance for after we see if she still has a career in an hour." The boardroom felt like a courtroom as Emily presented her evidence. Years of patient data, death rates correlated with price hikes, internal emails showing deliberate manipulation of trial results to justify higher costs. "This isn't just about numbers," she concluded. "Every data point on these charts was a person, a family, someone like my father who did everything right, followed every rule, and still lost everything because profit margins mattered more than human lives." "Pretty speech," Chen sneered. "But business isn't a charity." "No," Nathan interjected, "but it doesn't have to be a weapon either." He stood, addressing the board. James Monroe's original protocols would cut production costs by 60% while maintaining quality. Our profit margins would decrease, yes, but our market share would explode when we become the only major pharma company offering affordable, critical care medications. "And if we vote no?" asked another board member. Emily pulled out one final document. "Then tonight, every major news outlet receives proof that board members personally invested in companies that profit from patient bankruptcies caused by Prescott's pricing." The room erupted in outrage, but Emily raised her voice over the chaos. "Or, we could be the company that changes everything. your choice. The vote would define not just her future, but the lives of thousands of patients. As hands began to raise, Emily held her breath. All those in favor of implementing comprehensive reform. Hands rose slowly at first, then with growing momentum. Emily counted silently, her heart pounding. They needed a 2/3 majority. Each vote felt like a lifetime. Diana Chen remained seated, her face twisted with fury, but around her, longtime allies were raising their hands. The evidence was too damning, the potential scandal too great to ignore. 15, 16, 17. Nathan's voice remained steady as he counted. A slight smile played at the corners of his mouth. Motion carries. Reform package approved. The room erupted in a chaos of voices. Chen stormed out, already on her phone. Other board members clustered around Nathan, suddenly eager to align themselves with the winning side. But Emily barely heard them. Her phone was buzzing with a text from Maria. "Your dad's awake. He's asking for you." She slipped out of the boardroom, but Nathan caught up to her at the elevator. "Emily, wait. There's something else we need to discuss." "My father is stable," he finished. "I just checked with his doctors, but this can't wait." He held up a worn leather journal. "I found this in James Monroe's old files. It's his original research notes, including entries about your family." Emily's hand froze over the elevator button. "What?" "Your mother was one of his research assistants 25 years ago. She helped develop the early versions of the treatment protocols we just voted to implement." Nathan's voice softened. "She died in a lab accident before they could be completed." The world tilted slightly. "My mother worked here." "She did more than work here. She believed in what this company could be, what you just made it become." He offered her the journal. "I thought you should have this." Emily took the journal with trembling hands. Inside the cover was a photo she'd never seen before. A young woman in a lab coat, her smile achingly familiar from Emily's own mirror. "Thank you," she whispered. "Emily?" Nathan stepped closer. "I know we started as CEO and nurse, but these past months, watching you fight for what's right, seeing your brilliance and determination." He took a deep breath. "I think I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them. Emily looked at the journal in her hands, then back at Nathan. "I can't think about that right now. My father needs me." "I know." His smile was understanding. "Go, be with him. But when you're ready, I'd like to talk about the future, both for us and for the company." The elevator arrived with a soft ding. Emily stepped in, clutching her mother's journal. "Nathan, thank you for believing in me. Thank you for showing me how to believe in something bigger than profit." As the doors closed, Emily opened the journal to its first page. Her mother's handwriting flowed across it. "Medicine should heal, not bankrupt. Today, we start changing the world." Emily smiled through tears. "We did it, Mom. We really did it." 6 months later, Emily stood at a podium in Prescott Biotech's lobby, unveiling the new Anna Carter Memorial Research Wing. Her father sat in the front row, alert and smiling, his recovery progressing steadily under the reformed treatment protocols. "My mother believed that medicine should heal, not bankrupt," Emily addressed the crowd. "Today, we're making that vision reality. Our new sliding-scale payment system has already helped over 10,000 patients access life-saving treatments. And this is just the beginning." The applause was genuine, even from board members who'd initially opposed her. Success had a way of changing minds. Their stock had actually risen since implementing the reforms, as public goodwill translated into market share. After the ceremony, Emily found Nathan in her mother's old lab, now renovated but still bearing the original dedication plaque. "Your mother would be proud," he said softly, "not just of the reforms, but of you. The way you fought for change while staying true to your principles." Emily smiled, touching the nurse's badge she still wore proudly alongside her new research director credentials. "I'm keeping my hospital shifts, you know. 2 days a week. I never doubted you would. Nathan's eyes crinkled. It's one of the things I love about you, your dedication to hands-on patient care. This time, when he moved closer, Emily didn't step away. The past months had shown her that their shared vision was built on something real, something that transcended their different backgrounds. "So," he murmured, "ready to talk about that future now?" Emily laughed. "As long as you understand that date nights might get interrupted by emergency room calls. I wouldn't have it any other way." As they walked together toward her father, who was chatting animatedly with Maria about his latest progress, Emily felt the weight of her mother's journal in her lab coat pocket. It had become her touchstone, a reminder that one person's dedication to doing what's right could ripple out to change countless lives. She was no longer just the poor nurse who'd saved a powerful CEO. She was her mother's daughter, her father's champion, and her own kind of force for change. And standing beside her was a man who'd learned that true power lay not in profit margins but in the ability to help others heal. Some would call it a fairy tale ending. Emily called it a beginning of reforms, of love, of a future where medicine remembered its true purpose. After all, the most powerful antidote had turned out to be not the one she'd given Nathan that first night, but the one they'd found together. The cure for corporate greed was simply remembering our shared humanity.